Hi, I'm Tim Naftali. I'm director of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in Yorba Linda, California. It's November 7th, 2011. We are in Sacramento, and I have the honor and privilege to be interviewing Dorothy Landsberg for the Richard Nixon Oral History Program. Dorothy, thank you for doing this.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's go back to 1964, the summer of 1964. You get an internship.
I came to work as a clerk typist, actually, in the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, because those were job descriptions that already existed, and I was assigned to Bob Owen, who worked primarily in Mississippi, and I had the great pleasure to spend the summer working with him and some of the fine attorneys that worked with him, and I got to know John Doar in that context. And then a year later, when I graduated from college, I came back and worked permanently for John Doar for 2 years. So I got to know him pretty well in that time period.
Let's talk a little bit just for a moment about 1964. You write a paper about the Klan.
The Civil Rights Division only had a small number of attorneys, and they were primarily assigned to do litigation, voting rights, and there was a lot of information coming from the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And as a clerk typist, I had a security clearance. And so the second day that I was there, Bob Owen, of course I called him Mr. Owen at the time, gave me a large amount of material that had come from the FBI that was what we would call raw data. There was a cross burning here, there was a Klan rally there, there was a beating here, there was a church burned there, and it covered Mississippi, and the department was very concerned about violence, and there were other people who were analyzing and looking at it too, but Mr. Doar always believed in doing things himself and in making sure that he had some control over the process. So they asked me to start analyzing it, and I said to Bob Owen, what should my work product be? And he said, well, I guess some sort of a report. I was a history major. So I went and got some index cards. I went to one of the attorneys in the Mississippi section, Nick Flannery, and I asked for a map of Mississippi. And over the next week or 10 days maybe, I generated a short report, 19 pages, about the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Council in Mississippi that had some general information, but also was divided by geography.
And Mr. Doar was impressed by this.
Well, he actually wasn't initially. I learned later that he had read the draft. Bob Owen had given it to him, and he thought there was a mistake, or maybe even 2 or 3 in the first page and a half. So he put it down. And Michael Schwerner, Mr. Cheney, and Mr. Goodwin, 3 civil rights workers, were killed in June of 1964, and the president was going to send Allen Dulles, the former director of the CIA, to Mississippi. And I learned all of this after the fact, but John was collecting material, some of these FBI reports and other things, into a notebook. And Bob Owen was standing there, and he said to John Doar, you should stick in that report that Dorothy wrote, that summer employee I've told you about. And John said, oh, it has a mistake or 2 in the first page. And Bob Owen said, yeah, it does, but they're not glaring mistakes, and the rest of it is really pretty good. So as John Doar tells the story, he wrote draft in large letters across the top of it and punched it into the back of the notebook. And then he was called up to the Attorney General's office, and he gave it to Mr. Dulles, and Mr. Dulles took it home. And again, this is all the story that John tells, and he actually wrote it up in a document that he made part of a notebook for my 60th birthday. And the next morning, the Attorney General asked Mr. Doar to go with Mr. Dulles to Jackson, Mississippi for some investigation, and I'm sure it was also to calm the waters and various other reasons. And so Mr. Doar said to Mr. Dulles, do you want to take this notebook? And he said, no, I don't think I need it, but I will take the very excellent preliminary draft that's at the back of the notebook. So that's the story that Mr. Doar tells.
And you come back a year later, and what are your responsibilities then?
Well, I come back a year later, actually the last day of my summer work. Bob Owen and I and several other people went to lunch, and Bob Owen said, Mr. Doar told us that we should write a job description so we could hire people like you, when they graduate from college, who could come and work for us full time. And it was basically a paralegal, but we didn't call it that. We called it a research analyst. So there were several other research analysts who were hired before I came back, but I came back in June, and I had a desk right outside John's office, and I had a combination of support responsibilities and substantive responsibilities. I had a lot of responsibilities for the Voting Rights Act when it passed in 1965, and I actually helped a little bit with the closing argument that John gave. There was a federal trial that was held in 1967 for the Klansmen and the law enforcement officials who had been, some of them were convicted, but they had been accused of the murder of these 3 civil rights workers in '64. It took 3 whole years to bring it to justice, but eventually they were convicted by an all-white Mississippi jury. It was really the most remarkable thing, and another indication of John's tremendous impact that he had on events. But I helped a little bit with the closing argument that he gave, and that helped him find a speech that had been given by Mr. Justice Jackson in the Nuremberg trials, and he incorporated an aspect of it. It had to do, and I really can't do justice to it, I regret, but it had to do with, I think it was from Richard III, but it had to do with a comment that was made about people that had been murdered, and somebody, the murderer actually, was begging for mercy and said, these, I did not slay these people. And basically, John quoted it as Mr. Justice Jackson had, and I regret that I didn't review it so I could do it better. But basically, John said, but the men are dead. And so if you don't convict these law enforcement officials and these Klansmen, it's as if to say there were no murders, there was no Ku Klux Klan. And the law of Neshoba County, which is where they were killed, becomes the law of Mississippi. And I urge anybody who's listening to this to please go back and find the real quote, because I've totally butchered it, but I hope you get the essence of the fact that John was so careful about his preparation that he sent a research analyst up to spend a lot of time seeing if she could find a great speech that he could use, and actually I found it in a book that my husband had at home.
But so he didn't ask you to find that particular speech?
No, he asked me to find good closing arguments or good arguments, and that tells you a lot about Mr. Doar. And if you go on YouTube, apparently there's a film of John Doar describing this incident and reading from the closing argument, reading those lines from Shakespeare that I've totally butchered. And then the YouTube film immediately has the same argument that was given by Mr. Justice Jackson in the Nuremberg trials. So again, it's an example of a historical time when Mr. Doar called on people to really work very hard to try to do something that was important. And of course, we always wanted to do our very best for him.
Now, you've told me that language mattered a lot to Mr. Doar, to John Doar, because it, if not careful, language can connote partiality. What did he try to drum into you about the role of language?
Well, he was a fact man, and he was a fact man in many ways. Before he came to the Civil Rights Division, the way investigations, voter discrimination was very widespread in the South in the 60s. He came to the Civil Rights Division in 1960. Civil rights lawyers were basically Washington desk lawyers. And John believes that if you were going to prove up a case and if you were going to find out what happened, you need the facts. And this connects up with words. So people were sent, and he went himself always to Mississippi and Alabama and traveled the dusty roads to get the facts. Well, the question is, once you have the facts, and of course there are many different forms, we did voting cases, we did public accommodations, we did school desegregation, how do you present the facts to the court? And there are many things that have been written by many people over the years since then about the fact that he didn't like adjectives. You couldn't use adjectives. Something either was or it wasn't. You never said it clearly was. He didn't like adverbs either, or adjectives, that he had nouns and verbs. He wanted to describe things the way they were. And I think there was a very subtle reason why that was so important, is that I think he believed the fact finder, whether it was a federal judge or whether it was a member of the House Judiciary Committee, it was always much more persuasive if it was undersold and the reader could reach conclusions for themselves. And so he edited with a very tight style, and you never oversold your case, and you never could say anything to a court or, again, to a congressperson that you were not 100% confident of.
You mentioned to me that there was a concern, but what was the Civil Rights Division worried when they were concerned that people would view the Civil Rights Division as partial? Partial to what or to whom?
Well, I think it has to do with the issue of role, and the role of the Civil Rights Division was that we were to find the facts and argue for impartial application of the law to those facts. The civil rights movement, which we had a great deal of admiration for, the students from SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council, Dr. King, and SCLC, they had a particular perspective. But we needed to be independent of them. We needed to be independent actors. We were both trying to achieve the same things, which was fair and equal enforcement of the laws. But our credibility with the American people, our credibility with federal judges, our credibility with the Southern politicians that we were negotiating with before we filed lawsuit, it was critically important that we be independent and that our words did not reflect a bias.
It's going to be so important to the impeachment inquiry story. So let's talk about this now. Tell us a little bit about the relationship between Burke Marshall and John Doar as you observed it.
Oh, it was an amazing relationship. Burke Marshall was a very brilliant man. Had the ability to articulate things and see things legally, and was a very thoughtful lawyer. John Doar was more the field general, the person who tried big cases, who developed the facts. They had utmost admiration for each other, and they worked as a team. They complemented one another. I believe that the progress that was made in civil rights from 1961, when Burke Marshall became Assistant Attorney General, and John stayed on as first assistant from the Eisenhower administration until Burke left in 1965, and then John, of course, continued as Assistant Attorney General for 2 years. I think the progress that was made was in large measure because of the two of them. They worked well as a team. They had absolute trust and confidence in each other. And they brought both a practical common sense and a theoretical imagination that just worked well in harmony. And you saw the two of them together, and they were just, if they were talking about a particular strategy or talking about a particular action, you could just see the reliance and the trust and the respect that they had for each other. We were blessed to work with them both.
Dorothy, by the time you leave the Civil Rights Division, what's your title?
My title was always research analyst. But because I was part of John's immediate staff, I helped significantly with the first jury discrimination case that was brought in Lowndes County. I didn't stand up in court, but I did an awful lot of the work. I had major responsibility in the voting rights area. I was sent several times to Louisiana and Mississippi when there were jobs to be done that involved facts and law enforcement people. After James Meredith was shot, not killed, but shot in 1967, and there was the Meredith March that all the civil rights leaders came to, I helped with the coordination of that, dealing with the Mississippi Highway Patrol. John had confidence in me, and he also knew that I would, that if I had any questions, that he could rely on me, because I knew him well, we worked well together, and he would have confidence that I would not overstep, and that I would always come back and check with him. So it's interesting. The closer in harmony you could work with him, the more confidence he could have in you, because he couldn't do anything himself. But John Doar believed in control, and he believed that the way to get a job done was to have a team that worked as a team. But there was no question that there was only one leader. And I never had any problem about that. And I think it may have been harder for some of the other attorneys. I was not an attorney at the time. I am now. I've been for several decades. But at the time, I was a paralegal. And so I think that he didn't. I didn't have any ego, and I didn't have any question, but that John Doar was the leader. And so I think it may have been easier in some cases to have me do things, because he had confidence that I would do them the way he wanted.
How many other women were there in that group working around him?
Well, there were probably up to 10 research analysts by the time I left. Almost all of us married attorneys in the Civil Rights Division. John Doar used to say there was romance in records, by which he meant that if you went, for example, to the voting records, you would find out that very literate blacks were discriminated against and illiterate whites were able to vote. And you'd prove that because there were little checks where the registrar would help them. So he would say there's romance in the records, and by that he meant you could really find a story there. And he often said that. He also was sort of a justification for why we should all spend these long hours with him. But we jokingly said, well, there may not be romance in the records, but there are romances between lawyers and women in the Civil Rights Division. He did not a lot of women attorneys were hired, but some very good ones were. Battle Rankin, she's now Battle Rankin Robinson, was in the Mississippi field office. There were some views that maybe women weren't entirely treated as equals. I never felt that way at all. I felt he treated me entirely with respect and confidence, even though I was a woman and even though I didn't have a law degree.
Did you intend, by the way, when you started, did you intend to get a law degree?
Well, actually, I was admitted to the University of Michigan and the University of Pennsylvania when I graduated from college, and my father was annoyed at me because I didn't go to the University of Michigan Law School, where he had gone to undergraduate. And I just felt that in June of 1965 that the most interesting career move that I could make was to go and work for John Doar. And I got married and had 3 kids. Actually, I had kids that were 5, 4, and 2 when I was working for John Doar in the impeachment inquiry. And I didn't go back. I graduated from law school in '87, so it took a while before I did it, but I never regret for a moment that I delayed it.
Tell us, what did you do between the Civil Rights Division and your joining the impeachment inquiry?
I took a couple of years off to have some kids. I wrote a paper with John Doar about the FBI's role in civil rights enforcement that was presented at a conference that a number of very progressive liberals organized in New York. Probably, oh no, that was after the impeachment inquiry. I think I've gotten my time. I worked as a paralegal for a fine law firm, Shea and Gardner in Washington, D.C. That's what I did.
Tell us when you hear that Mr. Doar has been selected as majority counsel.
Well, there had been some speculation in the press that he had been selected. And one night, that he was under the consideration, pardon me. There was some speculation in the press that he was under consideration in the Washington Post. And one night the phone rang. I think it was late, around 9 or 9:30. And I answered it. And he said, "Dorothy?" And I instantly knew. And I said, "Oh, John." He said, "Dorothy, I'm not confirming anything, but if you will come to the House building," I think it was the House Rayburn building, but I'm not sure, "tomorrow at 10 o'clock, there will be a ticket for you, and the House Judiciary Committee will be meeting that day." So, obviously, he knew that evening that he had been selected, but he, true to his word, wasn't going to say a word to anybody about it. But he thought that I would like to be there the next morning. And of course, I did. So I did exactly as he suggested. I went to I believe it was the House Rayburn building, and I said who I was, and there was a ticket for me, and I was immediately taken to a seat, not in the front row, but and so I got to hear the announcement that he had been selected as by Chairman Rodino and by the Judiciary Committee to be the counsel for the impeachment inquiry.
Tell us a little bit, please, about how he pulled together his staff.
Well, I did not go to work for him until formally until April. But during the period of time in early January, somehow the date January 7th sticks in my mind as the first date that I did. I was asked to come and spend some time pulling together Maureen Barden's, it came to be known as the library crew. They were the non-lawyers who would be helping do the chronology cards and the other things that were so important. Some of those people I interviewed by phone, some of them I interviewed in person. I was not the only person that interviewed them, but John had confidence in my judgment. Periodically we would talk about things. He like many of us, needs someone to sort of bat things around with, and I often played that role with him in person or on the phone. And particularly I recall his talking to me about the importance that anybody who came to the staff have taken no position with respect to President Nixon and whether there had been any possible wrongdoing. And he was very insistent on that. And he wanted to make sure that in the interviews that I conducted and in the interviews that I was aware of, that strong directive be complied with 100%. So there were a number of people who had great skills, but because they had signed a petition or said something publicly or had attended an event, were not considered. I knew John said that he would be relying on some of the people from the Civil Rights Division. He didn't hire many of them as permanent employees. George Rayburn, a wonderful Southern Mississippian, among the people that he hired permanently. But there were others of us, Bob Owen, who John Doar had the same regard and respect for Bob Owen that Burke Marshall had for John Doar, and I did too. We called him Bobby. He was wonderful. Burke Marshall and Owen Fiss and I, maybe one or two others, were people, I think maybe you used the term kitchen cabinet, but we were people that John had come to have confidence with in the Civil Rights Division. And so we would, often on weekends particularly, because Burke Marshall and Owen Fiss and Bob Owen had full-time jobs and were not located in Washington, they would come down on a Friday evening or a Saturday, and there would be various things that needed to be done. And one of my tasks was to serve, when I could, Phyllis, John's secretary, did the most of it, but to serve a coordinating function with that group, check in with people, and and I think John's thinking this, or John's going to want help on that. So that was a lot of the role that I played.
On the weekends, would they caucus?
Well, we would come. People had offices. I mean, there were enough offices, so people would often Owen Fiss and who loved pizza. We always had to go and get him this fabulous pizza from a pizzeria on New York Avenue. Owen and Burke would sometimes be in the same office, but there would be, you just walk into an office and there would be a desk there and whatever. There's enough room. And sometimes there would be a draft. Often there would be a handwritten note for John. Often there would be a note that I had written that I would Xerox. So caucus, there would be communication. And sometimes the group would get together and I wouldn't be aware of it. I know there are times when he talked separately or collectively, particularly to Burke and Bob Owen. I mean, those are that's his core. That's John's inner sanctum of the people who are really going to help him decide things.
Do you remember a discussion over whether to pursue more investigation beyond what the Senate Watergate Committee had achieved, and what, of course, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force had provided?
I don't recall a specific conversation. I was very aware that the scope of the work and how the work was to be accomplished was a subject of ongoing discussion. John was a counsel for the majority, and of course there was a counsel for the minority, and John was always very concerned that they work in harmony. So there was that dynamic that had to be dealt with, and there was Congressman Rodino's staff, and that had to be dealt with. And then if you have a large group of very bright lawyers who are on the staff, that had to be dealt with. So I would say that I'm really not a good witness about specific conversations, but I was very, very much aware of the, I'm going to say, the desire of particularly some of the staff attorneys to have the scope be very broad, both in terms of subject areas and in terms of doing independent investigation.
Can you be a witness for some of the issues? Are you a witness for some of the issues that the Kitchen Cabinet considered to help Mr. Doar think through things?
Well, there was certainly the issue of how do we organize the existing facts and documents that we have, and Maureen Barden's library staff basically we used the same cron cards, these multiply cards that we'd used during the Civil Rights Division era to analyze voting records. And there was a great belief that things need to be organized chronologically, that if you know what's going on in one set of documents you get from one of the players and another set of documents or facts from the other players, that the only way to bring them, and that was really the genesis of what became the statements of information. So that's one very major agenda item. Later on, there was Renata Adler insistent that the transcripts be analyzed, and I think that was actually, there was some discussion about that I was aware of with the Kitchen Cabinet. I think whether John himself should take a position on anything and when was a subject that was dealt with. The actual work in terms of the scope of the investigation was not something that I was directly involved in, so I think there were a number of those items or some items, Tim, that I just don't have any personal knowledge of.
We'll go back to the transcript issue, talking about the April 3rd, the White House's April 30th, 1974 transcripts and the ones that the staff worked on beforehand. But I'd like to ask you this question of Mr. Doar taking a position. Was he as reluctant to take a position as has been described in various books?
Yes, I think that's absolutely. I think it was a core, I'm going to use the word value for him. And it goes back to, first of all, letting the facts speak for themselves. I think that's one component of it. Secondly, he doesn't see himself as a political speaker or a political actor. He sees himself as a law enforcement person. He sees himself as a fact person. And he's also, in addition to those two very important phenomena that I think led to it, is that I think he knew it made good political sense, even though he doesn't see himself as a political animal. You might see some contrast or tension there, but I don't really. And also, and with respect to that, I just think he had a sense that the timing wasn't right for him to do anything. I think that he wasn't saying, I'm never going to speak. He was saying, I'm not going to speak until the timing's right.
And then did he agree with the others that the timing was right? He ultimately did speak.
Well, actually, he said in a thank you note that he sent to me that I, along with Bobby, he called him Bob Owen, were among those that urged him, as he put it, to bite the bullet, and that he did bite the bullet. He gave a powerful set of comments, and I think that it helped with the momentum, and it came at the right time. He's a very smart man, and he knows people very well. And his management job in both the Civil Rights Division and in the impeachment inquiry, in terms of managing all the forces that were within his control, and then trying to impact on all the forces that were not under his direct control. In both cases, it required a man of enormous integrity, but also a man of enormous judgment. And that's really one of the reasons why he's my hero, is because I think he has tremendous judgment, and I think he knew that he needed to hold his powder till the right time.
Could you tell us what you observed of his relationship with Burke Jenner?
I think it was always respectful. I think that it was respectful because one of the things about John is he always is able to see things from the other person's perspective. And I think that he treats people generally how he would like to be treated. And I think that he recognized that it's not an easy thing to be the minority counsel. So I think that he treated him with respect, because I think he thought that was the right thing to do on a human level, and I also think he knew it was damn good politics to do that. And among the things that all of us, Phyllis and Maureen Barden, who ran we call it the library staff. I mean, if ever there was a misnomer about a group of people, to call them the library staff, I mean, in a way, it was part of the heartland of the operation. But Maureen Barden and I and Phyllis and a whole bunch of other people, we knew that if Burke Jenner wanted something, that had the highest priority. And we'd check in with him. I'd always say hi to him, and Phyllis just treated him with great respect. Now, was there tension? Obviously, because of the role. It goes back again to role. There was going to be some tension, and I don't have a clue. All I can speak to is Mr. Doar's intention as he articulated to us in terms of the way we were to deal with Mr. Jenner.
And did you have occasion to observe Mr. Doar's relationship with Leon Jaworski?
I didn't, but my brother Bob Shelton, who I recommended and who John hired, a lawyer from the Venable firm in Baltimore, I think might have some information with respect to that.
What caused you to join as a full-time staffer?
He gave me a special project. He periodically during the period of time from January to, I think it was late April. I know it was late April because it was after April 30th. Those transcripts that you referred to, they're what we call the blue volume. And they, of course, are the transcripts that were released by the White House. So it was after that, so it must have been in May, maybe even late May. John would call periodically. Sometimes I'd go and have dinner with him. Sometimes I'd go have a cup of coffee with him. But he called and he said to me, I would like you to come see me. And I said, fine. He said, I have a project for you, and I think it's an important project. I said, fine. So I went either that day or the next day. I was working as a paralegal for Shane Gardner and Steve Pollack, who had been John Doar's first assistant and then became Assistant Attorney General, who was my boss at Shane Gardner, was always very respectful of my time to work with John. And John described that Renata Adler believed that the blue volume contained significant edits, distortions, changes, use of unintelligible, and other techniques that were part of the cover-up. And so when the president released this blue volume on television, he had stacked up there, there's great, and said that he was leveling with the American people, in fact, his intention was to do exactly the opposite. And she, I think, believed that. It'd be interesting to ask her, but my recollection, Tim, is that she believed that just after reading the blue volume of the transcripts. I don't think we yet had the other transcripts. So I think her first impression that these had been edited came from reading the blue volume, not from the sort of comparison that we eventually did. But I'm uncertain about that.
You mean that you think that the kitchen cabinet, of which the two of you were members, hadn't yet seen what the staff's 8 transcripts?
I don't think we'd seen all of them or seen them in the same way. And again, I don't have an exact recollection of when they came, although there's a picture of my brother, Bob Shelton, and John Doar carrying the briefcase with the transcripts and the tapes that came from the grand jury. So I can can, it's like many people, I'm not a good witness of all things, so I can see that. And I remember seeing the president's speech with this big blue volume, dated April 30th. And I think the transcripts came first, and then I think we got the white version. But I don't think people were focusing on the fact that people understood that the transcripts of the tapes that came from the grand jury, that they were pretty damning. But I don't think anybody had really focused on the fact, except Renata Adler, that the transcripts in this blue volume had been doctored and were part of the continuing cover-up. And I think she did that without comparing them to the original transcripts. I think she is a very, very smart woman. She knows words. And I think that and she'd been very much involved, and she knew the role of John Dean and the role of Halderman and the role of Ehrlichman and some of the other people on the tapes, and I think she said these have been doctored. Now, whether she first had a glimpse of that and then she asked to see the transcripts, I can't tell you that. But I do know that John Doar called me, and both of them existed, and he said to me, Renata thinks that the transcripts in the blue volume, and that's what we called them, have been edited, and that it's part of the continuing cover-up. And I have asked other people here about that in the course of this conversation that we had subsequently, not all on the phone. And they've tended to poo-poo it. But I'd like you to do some analysis of that. And I think that Maureen Barden could free up one or two people from her library staff to help you. And so I and several other people sat about to compare the transcripts. And a lot of it is very nuanced, Tim. And it's only when you go over them again and again and again that you can see the level of the editing that have been done. And it comes in all different forms. And so A, we had to figure out what we had, and B, we then had to figure out how to present it, right? That's what you always have to do as a lawyer, or probably as a historian. You have to figure out the facts and you have to decide how to present it. So we came up, actually I came up with the idea that we couldn't just release all of this stuff, and we couldn't describe what it was, we had to show what it was. We had to demonstrate what it was. So I'll take an example, if I may.
Sure.
I took, this is all the things were done originally, just like they are in any operation, and these are the original comparison. This is my copy that I've saved. And then after the end of the impeachment inquiry, it was all put into printed version, and this was done, I think, in the fall of 1974 and the spring of 1975. But I went through last night to try to find a couple of examples because I think it may illustrate it better than my poor description of it. This is page 43. It's a March 22nd, 1973 tape. And on this left-hand side, we have the House Judiciary Committee transcripts. And I always saw them as the tapes that had come from the grand jury. And then we made them, and I know you've interviewed people who helped made these. And then this is the White House transcript, what I call the blue volume. So and it gives you the exact pages, and the members of the House Judiciary Committee and eventually the members of the House of Representatives could go and listen to the tape. So they could take this or take whatever. And so here's an example of where in the White House transcripts, the ones that were doctored, I'm going to use that word now, but you always use the word edited then, the president is quoted as saying, well, all along John Mitchell is arguing that is how we use flexibility in order to get off the cover-up plan. So he puts the words in John Mitchell's mouth, but he says in order to get off the cover-up plan. If you go to the House Judiciary Committee version, the president says, but now what all that John Mitchell is arguing then is that now we use flexibility. John Dean says that's correct, and the president says in order to get on with the cover-up plan. Now, if that's buried in a transcript, you're never going to see that. A lot of people would argue that, well, in order to get off the cover-up plan is pretty damning. Even in John Mitchell's mouth, he puts the words. But this is much more damning. And so what we did, is that you can see in this version, we released it like this. And so it was perfect for television. So they were released on 7/9/1974, and the news on 7/10/1974. The reporters took all this and they made demonstrations, exhibits, and were able to do that. Should I give you one more, or do you have another question?
No, go ahead. Please.
Unintelligible. Some of the words were unintelligible, but it will come as no surprise to you that the word unintelligible was used when it was very clear on the tape what the word was, and it was a damning word. This one is from March 21st, so the day before. It's on page 22nd of these comparisons. And the president is said in the White House version, the doctored, edited version, if it really comes down to that, we would have to unintelligible some of the men. Doesn't mean anything. If you go over here to the correct version, well, if it really comes down to that, we cannot, maybe, we'd have to shred it in order to contain it again. So the difference between those two versions is really quite striking. And so it's the skillful use of the word unintelligible. And my belief, Tim, is that Renata Adler figured that out from just looking at this version.
Do you remember Mr. Doar's reaction when you showed him some of these comparisons?
Well, we had some missteps. First of all, you don't get from a conversation to this without some little back and forth. One of the missteps is that I had secretaries type the whole transcripts. I knew they had to be pretty early on I had this vision in my mind that there needed to be a comparison. But I started out by having the secretaries type, I think it was one of the March 21st tapes. There are two tapes of March 21st. And John was not pleased with that. He thought that was not a good use of their time, and he thought it was too much, and he was right. But my experience with John has always been that when he says something like that what you have to do is you have to stop and think about it and why it was he said that. And at first I was irritated because I thought it was not the product I was going to produce, but I thought it was a necessary first step. But I kept thinking about what he told me, that it was too much. And it was because of that conversation that I came up with this idea of lining it up. So in that example that I just gave to you about the cover-up plan, the difference jumps out at the page. You don't have to say, oh, this is awful, or oh, the president is engaged in a cover-up. And it's always more effective if the reader figures it out themselves than if you hit them over the head with it.
Do you think that Mr. Doar was a little bit skeptical about Renata's finding?
Well, I think my recollection, and I've just looked at something, again, at that thing he wrote for my birthday, and he said that the first time she said it, he sort of didn't immediately pick up on it, and she had to push him a second time. And I don't know, but that would be the fact that he told us, and from that I might draw the conclusion that, yeah, initially he was a little skeptical.
Did you stay with the staff right through the resignation of the president?
I stayed with the staff right through the resignation, and one of the most enjoyable dinners of my life was, I think, on August 8th, 1974, maybe August 9th, the day the president resigned. Do I have the dates more or less right?
Well, August 8th is when he announces that he would resign at noon the next day.
Yeah, well, I think it was the night of August the 8th, and a small group of us went to dinner. John took us to dinner. One of the great things about John, you could never get a restaurant check from him. I mean, he was very generous to us all. Actually, he made these gifts that he gave to a number of us. This is a seal of the House Judiciary of the House Judiciary Committee, and then it says Impeachment Inquiry on the bottom. That's a little aside, but he took us all to dinner. I don't remember where. It was someplace on Capitol Hill, I think. My recollection is Bob Owen was there. My recollection is that Maureen Barden was there. My recollection is that there were one or two other close people from the staff. And it was not a night of gloating, not a night of patting ourselves on the back, but really a night of mutual respect, and a night where we thought that the work of a group of people made a difference. And it was an important occasion for me.
Did he have a sense at all that that the process had ended too soon?
He never indicated that. It goes beyond your question, but he thought that the pardon was correct. He said that to me. I think that John's devotion is to the rule of law, and I think that he believed that by the resignation of President Nixon that the rule of law had prevailed. And I don't think I never heard him articulate the view that it ended too soon. I think that I have heard him say that the articles of impeachment, and I think it was 7 Republicans, that speaks volumes.
Can you recall, since you were there at the time, can you recall whether he ever showed confidence that this would happen, but if his confidence in the fragile coalition, as it was called at the time, was he confident that a number of Republicans would make it a bipartisan majority?
I don't know that he was confident throughout the process. I think there were a period of time when he was presenting those statements of information week after week after week when it was tedious work. And I think he kept going because he'd been involved in a lot of tedious work before Tim, and he had great belief in facts. And but there was sort of the president resigned not just because of the smoking gun of those tapes, but there had been a whole press of events, the transcripts, the statement of information, and so I think during that time period, there was a momentum is the word I'm looking for, and I think during that time period, John had increased confidence. But I don't buy my answer want to ever suggest that he lost confidence, because I don't know whether he did or not. I can't speculate what goes on, but he never indicated it to any of us.
That's what I meant. Whether he ever talked to you and said, "I think we."
He would talk about the task that has to be done. We have to work harder. I mean, and that was true in the Civil Rights Division. When we lose a case, and we lost a lot of cases with federal Southern judges, but then they would be reversed on appeal. His view was, well, we just have to work harder. We have to find better facts. We have to prove our cases better. We have to work a little more and a little harder. And I think that's again the measure of the man.
Do you remember how he felt about how the committee was taking the statements of information? Because the committee was, I mean, I've read that the committee at some point was starting to lose patience, and there needed to be some side seminars to the Cates, for example. Dick Cates participated in seminars to try to give additional information to the Congress, to the members of Congress, to help them understand what was going on.
I was aware that Dick Cates was doing that. I wasn't involved in any of that. John talked about the difficulty of plowing through the work that needed to be done. That was what he talked to me, the difficulty of doing it. He never suggested it needed to be done differently. He never suggested he lost faith in it. He just said it's tough. It's a tough going here, Dorothy.
I mean, because it took 6 weeks to present all this material.
Yes, and there was a lot of criticism. You've read the newspaper accounts. There was a lot of criticism, view that he had perhaps lost his way or was going too slow, or various criticisms. But he thought that was important to be done that way.
I've heard that he occasionally would go to the library late at night, and because everybody was working late, and just spend time with the young people in the library.
Oh yeah, and he loved the cron cards, and he'd sit there with them, and he'd look at He'd look at White House logs. I mean, I don't remember the details now, but we got an enormous number of White House logs of various things, visitors in and out, you know, for various people's offices. There was an enormous amount of paper, and it was all put on these cron cards, and John would go and sit there, and I sometimes sat with him because I often would work because I had these little kids, and I had a husband who was the head of the appellate section in the Civil Rights Division, and I had, you know, a couple of good babysitters, but so I would often work at night.
And did he do this in the Civil Rights Division? Did he sit with
Oh,
cron
yes,
cards?
he was always, and one of the reasons he says there's romance in the records is because we all knew that he was looking at the records himself. He has this expression, we're never going to be second story men, and we always need to get down on the first story and find the facts ourselves, and that's the essence. Of course, he never did anything that he didn't, he never expected us to do anything that he didn't do extra himself. In terms of the hours that we worked, in terms of the sometimes going on dangerous places in Mississippi and Alabama, in terms of pushing ourselves, he was always working harder than anybody.
So just so we have a sense of what that meant in the Civil Rights period, would he actually put together help assemble the facts for a case that we brought to trial?
He wouldn't maybe help, well, he would go and interview witnesses, he would go and look at voter registration documents. He wouldn't look at them a lot, but yes, initially he did a lot of the work himself. Later on, as we got bigger and we had more lawyers and more cases, he would be more apt to look at briefs and whatever. But if there was a footnote, he wanted to see the underlying documents. But in 1960 and 1961, it was John Doar who was traveling the dirt roads of rural Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama.
Would he tell you stories?
Oh, yes. And he said that's what you did when you were a lawyer in New Richmond, Wisconsin, the small town that he came from. I mean, he said, you know, this is no different. You have to get out and find the facts yourselves. And he has wonderful stories about the people that he worked with, Tim. I mean, and there's a lot of film that's been done. He's made a number of presentations, and there's a lot of film where he tells stories about the sharecroppers and his witnesses, and they're wonderful stories. And he tried major cases himself. He tried the Klansmen who were responsible for killing Mrs. Liuzzo after the Selma to Montgomery March. He got a conviction on December 3rd, 1965. It was his birthday. It happened to be the first date I had with my husband in Montgomery, Alabama, so I remember it well. He tried that case himself. He got a conviction. He was in his 40s, and then he tried the Neshoba County case, and he argued cases. He argued cases with the Fifth Circuit. He argued other. I mean, he was a trial lawyer. He was an appellate lawyer. He was a field general, and he managed all these crises. In addition to all of the litigation that we were doing, there was, you know, James Meredith getting admitted to Ole Miss. John was there. Marshall McShane is on one side, John Doar's on the other side. And then there's the wonderful story that was told after the funeral of Medgar Evers, where he prevented that riot, where he walked behind the law enforcement people out into the middle of the street, held up his hand and said, "My name is John Doar, D-O-A-R. You can't win this way. People know that what I stand for here is right." And then he turned to several of the African American and civil rights people, "Come along, help me move these people along." He prevented a riot, and he got a presidential award for it. So he's a man of great courage and bravery. But I think the challenges of moving back and forth between this law enforcement and then needing to deal with these crises, he's just he's one of a kind, Tim.
Can you recall what role Burke Marshall may have played in shaping the articles of impeachment? And in what role the kitchen cabinet in general?
Well, I was aware because I managed the drafts of various things, and I learned very early on that you had to date things and you had to put times. And there were several times when a particular draft, there would be a complaint about it, that there were changes that hadn't been incorporated. And when you had multiple drafts running around, you had significant problems. So I would keep the drafts and I would date them. And I think it was the articles of impeachment, but I'm not certain, where there was a concern. I think it was between Burke Marshall and Bob Owen, but I'm not certain about, you know, whether changes had been incorporated. And I basically found the drafts and demonstrated that, in fact, it wasn't a typing mistake. It was an editing mistake that had been made in the middle of the night. So it had a great impact on me because I was responsible for getting drafts from Owen and getting drafts from Bobby and getting drafts from Burke and getting them to the typist and getting them to the right typist and then proofing them afterwards. And so, which was critically important if you have multiple people editing things and if they're tired. And I think that Burke Marshall had a big role, but I cannot describe it to you substantively.
But so this is an instance where both of them were making edits on the same?
Yes. Well, on this, yeah, yes.
On the same article?
Yes.
And some of the edits hadn't gotten through?
Well, that was the belief. In fact, they were edits that had been made and then crossed out because people were tired. But I'm sure there may have been other edits that didn't get through to him. But that one is I have a very clear recollection on it because, but for the fact that I'd saved the drafts, and nobody made a big thing about it. I just demonstrated, I just went back and said, well, this is crossed out. It's my understanding that you would like it put back in now. And so I didn't make a big thing about it, but it was very important to me because it was my responsibility. And in the middle of the night, it's very hard to manage multiple drafts with people and multiple secretaries.
Now, the people watching this are in an era where obviously you've got, iPhones and email and what have you. That didn't exist then, and you didn't even have fax machines then.
That's correct.
So these drafts were being worked on at the office.
Oh yes, and again,
that was on a weekend.
It was on a weekend. Well, I don't know if it was a weekend. People may have stayed over. My recollection is the articles of impeachment were finalized in the middle of a week, but I may be wrong about that. But it may have been the weekend before, and the process went on for a long period of time. And there were different articles of impeachment, and of course the ones for Watergate were the ones that were the most important to John. I mean, the others needed to be done, but it was the Watergate one that was the most important.
You mean the first article?
Yes.
The second being about abuse of power?
Yes.
Then why was that the most important?
I just think that he thought that was the game changer. I think he thought that was the core.
Did you observe any tension between the regular staff and the kitchen cabinet?
Well, I want to be clear that the kitchen cabinet may have varied and that there may have been one or two people in the regular staff who were also participating fully in the process. It's very hard, Tim, to manage a group of people and to get a final document or a final product and not include everybody who's worked very hard on it. And there are always issues about that. And there were issues in the Civil Rights Division people. There was the inside group and the outside group. And I think that comes with the territory. I really do. Whether it was particularly, and I'm not a good person to ask because I'm, of course, by your terminology, I guess I'm a member of the kitchen cabinet. I certainly was somebody who John had known. And I've described to you, I had a mix of substantive and support functions, and that was true in both the Civil Rights Division and impeachment inquiries. So I think that the people that John really relied on were a mixture of people that he had known before, and I think he came to have enormous confidence in Evan Davis, enormous confidence. And I can't begin to speak for what Evan would say about perceptions of that. So I think, I guess, in summary, some of it's inevitable, but yes, there were tensions.
Let me ask you about other relationships. Did you observe the relationship between Joe Woods and Mr. Doar?
I knew that they had known each other for a long time before, and I knew that John always treated him with respect. And I never really particularly saw any interaction beyond that.
I think they were also roommates for part
yes.
of the period, so that's what I'm referring to. Did you ever meet Hillary Rodham?
Yes, yeah, I did. My recollection is that she didn't work on Watergate; that she worked on one of the other related investigations. By Watergate, I mean the break-in, and she had long hair. She put a very colorful wall hanging by her desk, which caused some comment. Bill would be around periodically. I guess they maybe they were fiancés then, her fiancé, I don't know. She had gone to Yale, well, they both had, and had met John. I think the story is that when he was up there to give a presentation, maybe to Burke's class, maybe to Owen's class, she was hardworking. Those are my recollections. I remember at the picnic, we had a picnic, I think it must have been later in August, out at a park in probably in Maryland, maybe Northwest Washington, and actually there's some pictures floating around of that as well, some that were taken at the office, and there's a picture of her, I think, there, and she was having fun.
Let me ask you about the story of Peter Rodino's speech.
Well, I can only tell you a little bit about it, Tim. John had great faith in Renata's ability to write.
Where did she come from? How did she end?
Renata Adler was a New Yorker who was, I would call her a literary type. She worked for the New Yorker magazine. I think that she first came to John's attention and to all of our attention during the Meredith March, which would have been, I think, in '66, maybe '67, when I'd said Meredith was shot, and there were a group of reporters, and in addition to dealing with the Highway Patrol about various things, there was some support provided for the press. And she wrote an article about the Meredith March, I believe, Tim, that John Doar thought she got it right. That would be an expression John would use, well, you got it right. And he thought Renata got it right. And he then lived in New York and sort of knew her professionally, and she was a friend of Burke's. And he had great confidence in her and in her ability to write and her ability to figure out that there was something fishy with these transcripts. So she wrote, my recollection is that she wrote a draft of a speech for Rodino, and then it was edited in Rodino's office. And she had a commitment in Sardinia, and the edits were Federal Expressed. I guess it was Federal Express, whatever international, because there were no Xerox machines and certainly no email and PDFs or whatever to her in Sardinia, and she was not happy with the edits. So my responsibility was to get a draft, and that was acceptable to Renata, but that would accept at least some of the edits from Rodino's office. And it took some sensitivity, and I liked Renata. She's a unique individual, but I've always liked her. And actually I saw her about 10 days ago. We had this presentation, the Civil Rights Division reunion and program called Voices of the Civil Rights Division Then and Now, and John Doar was interviewed. My husband was involved, and Renata came to that, and I saw her. And it was my job to deal with her with the sensitivity and the diplomacy and the respect that she was entitled to, but that I also bring to bear some of my own strength, because we had to have a draft. And John's, I mean, he'd say all this to me. I knew. He just said, you have to deal with Renata. She's in Sardinia. She doesn't like these edits. If we have good reasons for not accepting them, or if we want to make changes, we have to be able to articulate why. So I spent hours in the middle of the night on the phone with Renata in Sardinia, getting her edits of the edits. And then it went back to, then John looked at it, and he generally agreed, and then it went back to her. And my recollection is that I carried it over to Rodino's office. and said that we really appreciated the comments that had come, but that these were the edits that John Doar would like to see made to the speech before it was given. And it carried the day. They were made.
Did he see them before you? Did John Doar see them before you sent them to Rodino?
Oh yeah, I went. Oh yes, again, it's a critical thing that if you have to know how is that they were Renata's edits, but I had to get John to look at them and have John agree that these were I wasn't going to sell them to Rodino's office without his stamp of approval.
Did he change any of them to your recollection?
Not to my recollection. Not to my recollection. And I'm not sure in the greater scheme of things that they were major substantive changes, Tim. You know, people who are involved in words, you're a historian, you know that people are involved in nuance matters, context matters, tone matters. And these were nuanced changes that Renata thought needed to be made. And John, they were run by John, and then they went back. And my belief is that it'd be fascinating if one could ever find any of those, but my belief is that the changes that Renata had proposed, it was her speech, and I think that her second set of edits, Rodino's being the first set, I think they were largely accepted.
Dorothy, we're going to stop for a moment and change cards.
I want to talk about Maureen Barden. I think she's just a princess, a prince. I mean, she's just remarkable.
And if there are any other, Bernie or any of the others that you mentioned, Evan, I asked you about Joe Woods. If there are other members we talked about Kate's, of the sort of senior team that you interacted with. I asked you about Hillary Rodham, but that makes sense given that she becomes Secretary of State eventually. And we're doing fine in terms of time, actually doing really well.
I'm not talking too much?
Oh, no, please. No. This is, no. It's impossible, actually, to talk too much.
Now, see, he says in this, you stepped in and locked up the introduction to the summary of information. I don't remember that, but I sure do remember the chairman's July 26th speech.
Okay, well, we have speed, so.
So we were talking about Chairman Rodino's July 26th speech, and after that I asked you if there were some anecdotes that you would like to preserve, and you said that I ought to ask you about one involving your husband and children.
My husband is Brian Landsberg. He graduated from Bolt Law School, where John graduated from, and at the University of Berkeley, and he came to work. He actually flew to Washington the day of President Kennedy's killing in Dallas, and he came to work for the Civil Rights Division in January. And he and I met and dated there, and we got married. I left the Civil Rights Division when we got married because he stayed. I knew I couldn't have any semblance of a decent relationship and time because we all worked 7 days a week. And when John called to talk to me about this project involving the analysis of the transcripts, I came back from my meeting with John, and I said to Brian that I told Brian what John had talked about, and I said to him, I really want to do this. Steve Pollack will give me a leave of absence from Shane Gardner, I'm sure. And he said to me, Dorothy, he said, I support your working for John any time. He said, but he has no bounds in terms of the amount of work. And he said, we have 3 kids, Elizabeth, Rachel, and Joshua. They're 5, 4, and 2. And he said, how on earth are you going to work for John Doar and maintain any responsibility for the family? And he had a very important job as head of the Civil Rights Division Appellate Section. And I said to him, well, maybe I could work part-time. And he just started laughing. He said, John Doar doesn't know what part-time is. But of course, within 24 hours, he said fine. But he did everything that any reasonable person would do to try to get me to control the amount of time. And I did work part-time. Unfortunately, most of the part-time was during the night, and I would often go at 3 or 4 in the afternoon after I'd spent some time with the kids, come home from grocery store or whatever, and then I would go, and I'd often come home at 5 or 6 or sometimes even later in the morning. And so my husband's a very smart man. And so the kids would ask, well, where's Mommy? Where's Mommy? How come she's gone all the time? And Brian said, well, Mommy has to help figure out whether the president is a good man or a bad man. And when they figure it out, then maybe she'll come home and we'll see more of her. So kids being kids, and my husband being very smart, the kids would run up to me when I'd come home and they would say, Mommy, Mommy, when will you stay home? Haven't you figured out yet whether the president is a good man or a bad man? And Brian tells this story to the kids. But the gloss that I would put on it is that I got enormous support from him. He had a very responsible job, and he tried very hard to be there when I needed it. And we were very fortunate that we had a circle of friends who also helped. And but I spent a good part of late May, June, July, and early August working part-time for John Doar, 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week.
What did you do after the comparison was finished?
Oh, I did a variety of things. I worked with Maureen Barden in her staff. I was part of the kitchen cabinet. I don't think the comparison was finished until July 9th,
Yes.
74. So there was only a couple of weeks between then and the start of the hearings. I mean, of the consideration. That's the word that I want. And that was during the period of time that I described earlier, Tim, when the momentum was building. And that was during that period of time that I was managing drafts and that I was in and out of John's office a lot.
After the votes and 3 articles of impeachment are passed, what did you think you were going to do next?
Well, my husband had accepted a speaking engagement at Hilton Head that was scheduled to start on, I think, the 11th or 12th of August. And we were having this enormous debate about was I going to go or were the kids going to go or what were we going to do. And so when the vote came and then the president resigned, and we had this dinner that I described, I remember going in the next day and telling John that Brian was giving a speech about civil rights at Hilton Head, and he just said to me, "You're done, Dorothy." He said, "You don't need," I didn't have to even ask. He said, "You're done. You don't have to do anything more." He said, "If I need you for one particular thing," he says, "I'll call you." But he says, "You're done. I mean, he knew how hard I'd worked. And of course, all of them had worked hard too. But so he said, "You're done." And I saw him a fair amount over the next months. He was still in town, and we would have him for dinner, or I would go and have dinner with him. But I officially ended then. I did a couple of other things. And I went back to Shane Gardner as a paralegal, where I had a terrific job working for Steve Pollack.
But before it was clear the president was going to resign, did you anticipate working on the trial?
I anticipated staying, yes. By that time, I was not only did I have what I think was a role that made a difference, but I was invested. I mean, you didn't work on this, Tim, and not get invested in wanting to make sure that the facts were presented. And I had enormous respect for Maureen Barden. She was somebody who'd known John before, and she put together, some help from me, but with her own good judgment and some help from other people, a terrific library staff. She was one of the hearts of the organization. She had capacity. She would do anything, and she was going to have an important factual and role in presenting the facts and developing the checking. I mean, things are checked and checked and checked, and it's substantive. You got to get it right. And I worked very closely and well with her, and so I knew that there would be a role there. And I knew that any time there were something where there needed to be something drafted or edited or whatever, that John had confidence that I could could help manage that process.
You've shared with me notes that you took on a conversation with Mr. Doar on Tuesday, July 23rd, which is the day before consideration begins, and then also the day before the Supreme Court hands down its decision.
Yes.
It mentions here that Maureen is to correct Mr. Doar's Friday speech.
Which is an example where my recollection from that, Tim, is that John gave me a speech with some corrections or some edits, and that I would work with Maureen to make sure that was finalized. That would be fairly typical. I mean, he had a small group of people he had confidence in. Maureen Barton is an example of somebody he had enormous confidence in. She hadn't worked in the Civil Rights Division. But
Do you recall Renata having worked on that speech, that Friday speech? That was that important speech,
that was
wasn't
the bite the bullets, what
Yeah.
he called, yes, yeah, it was. I have no recollection one way or another. I don't know, she might not have been around, although I don't think so. I think she was around during that time. Although I have no specific recollection.
So, what do you recall of your own reaction to the pardon?
Initially, I was furious. I was outraged that somebody could just walk away, in my opinion, just walk away from this terrible, difficult time that the president and the people around him had put the country through. And I knew that John felt differently. He didn't feel, I probably did feel a little vindictive, a little bit, but people should pay for what happened. I really didn't think of it in a larger context, Tim. I think John Doar did. And I actually think President Ford and the people around him did too. So I've come to believe that it was absolutely the right thing.
Now, you recall Mr. Doar's opinion of the pardon. Did he actually say this to you directly?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Did you have a discussion about why you disagreed with him at that time?
I probably did, but I was probably a little more measured than I was just now with you. I think I know John awfully well, and as soon as I said a word or two, I could probably tell that he disagreed, and so I probably. But he was very clear that he thought it was the right thing for the country.
Jeff Banchero, who worked on the transcripts, told us a story that at one point, this is around just after the president's resignation, he showed a little bit of disappointment to Mr. Doar about that the process hadn't gone a little further, and Mr. Doar said was not very happy with that opinion and he pointed to the statements of information in the list. He said that's our we did our work.
Yes.
That's our achievement.
Yeah.
It didn't have to go further.
Right. When you asked me the question earlier, I weren't aware that Jeff was the person that said it, and I focused on the articles, but I think it's the same point, is that John had confidence that the work that had been done would stand up. And of course it has. It has to stand up. There's really, I don't think, any debate in the country about the abuse of power and the cover-up that was done by President Nixon.
What was the lesson for you of this experience? What did you take from it?
Well, I guess I would say the same lesson that I took from the Civil Rights Division, which is a wonderful lesson, and that's that the institutions can be effective and the rule of law can prevail, and that a group of people who take their responsibilities seriously, who have the good fortune to be in the right place at the right time, can make a difference. And I felt extraordinarily fortunate to have had not one but two opportunities where I thought, just through good fortune, especially the first one, that I was in the right place at the right time, Tim. And I'm going to quote from something that John said. He wrote to my daughter Elizabeth, because I think it speaks really better about him. It's dated 4/3/03. It was 8 years ago when I was celebrating my 60th birthday. And my daughter, Elizabeth, put together a lovely photograph album and asked various people to write things about and she was the daughter who was 5 years old at the time, and asked people to write things about me. And John wrote something both about the Civil Rights Division and the impeachment inquiry, and there's a cover note in his very distinctive writing. I mean, it's hard to read. Oh, that's the other thing, is that I can read his writing pretty well. So when he has these edits, and secretaries can't read them, not 100%, but I can do it pretty well. Elizabeth, I herewith hand in my assignment. Your father kindly extended the deadline. Brian gave him an extension of time. Your mother has had quite a life, an enviable life, and it's barely half over. From the time I first knew her, your mother appreciated the maxim about life that, quote, you can't repeat the class next summer. This course is only offered once. End of quote. Best to you all, John. And if ever there was a person who lived that maxim, was John Doar, and he gave it his all. And I was so blessed to have served not once but twice with him in matters involving the rule of law and the public interest.
Let me ask you about that. Did you find, having watched him and learned from him in both instances, did you get a sense that he was under more pressure atop the impeachment staff than he had been in the Civil Rights Division? Did you get a sense?
No, Tim, I actually think that the pressure in both jobs was beyond belief. I really do. And you know, I sat outside his office in the Civil Rights Division, and and I was single, and I lived on Capitol Hill, and he had a family, and we'd both get in very early, but I was often there at 7:30, he was often there at 7:45, and when he was in town, and he would often leave at 11:30, and he would have worked that entire time, been back and forth to the Attorney General's office on the phone about the use of fire hoses and dogs in Birmingham, the Freedom Riders, getting James Meredith, trying to hold the country together. He was under enormous pressure. Every civil rights worker who was beat, every sharecropper who they refused to gin his cotton, was a matter of importance and real pain to John. And there were many other actors in the civil rights period. I mean, there was the president, there were the civil rights groups, there were local law enforcement officials, there was the judiciary, and there was the Congress. But I truly believe that in 1960, there was this legal caste system, 1961, and no belief as to how we were going to get through what was really a terrible time for us diplomatically and everybody else because of the severe legal discrimination. And by the time he left in 67, that caste system had not been entirely, I'm not saying the discrimination was in it, but that legal caste system. John Doar, I believe, more than President Kennedy, more than Attorney General Kennedy, more than Burke Marshall, was the reason for that change. And I think that was enormous pressure.
Why do you say that?
Because I think that there were so many opportunities for things to have gone wrong. And because I think that he was the person that brought the Congress along, he and all the people who worked with him and all the structure, but I think he was the core of that. I see a great analogy to the impeachment inquiry. And he, in many ways, there are many other forces. I mean, the 7 Republicans, the existence of the tapes, the role of the grand jury in subpoenaing the tapes, endless numbers of things. And yet the core actor, that's the word I'm looking for, the core actor, I believe, was John Doar. Now, you ask a slightly different question, which I'm also going to answer, which is about the pressure. I think being the core actor in either one of those incredible, what was the most important thing that was going on, or one of the most important things that was going on during the civil rights period from 61 to 67 was the the need to change this caste system, and the same thing during the period of time in '74 and Watergate. So I can't distinguish between those. Maybe somebody else who has a better perspective can.
Well, what was the caste system in the second?
The caste system in the only in the '60s.
Of course, in the '60s.
There was no caste system. It was just that there had been an abuse of power. The rule of law was threatened. The political process was threatened. I mean, imagine what would have happened if the cover-up had prevailed, right? I mean, that's the alternative. I mean, I'm inarticulately trying to say what was the alternative in both cases, and who's the core actor. Doesn't diminish the fact that there are other core actors, Tim.
I think for the viewer, and you knew and know Mr. Doar so well, I think people would say, well, what did the difference of one individual make? They'll say, all right, he was certainly at the core. What difference did his particular personality and character make at the core?
Integrity, judgment, strength, leadership, the ability to inspire and maintain coalitions and actors. Great respect for individuals, commitment to the rule of law, and some modesty. He never overemphasized his own abilities and his own sense of who he was. He believed in teamwork, he inspired people, and so I think that sense of modesty was one of the things that made him the great leader that he was, Tim.
Did you see him take advantage of or make use of the alliances that he had with some people in Congress that he developed when he was at the Civil Rights Division? Did you see those come into play at all in the impeachment?
I didn't, but I was totally unaware of that. I think some of that may have dealt with people in Rodino's office or made his own personal contacts. It wouldn't surprise me, but I have no knowledge.
And then the other, just to know whether, did he ever talk to you about Martin Luther King?
Yes.
And the role that...
Yeah, well, yes, and he had great regard for Dr. King, and he had great regard for SCLC. He had enormous regard for Andy Young, who was one of Dr. King's lieutenants. Great respect for CORE, Congress for Racial Equality. And he said it 10 days ago, his greatest respect and devotion was for the students from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council and Bob Moses, Robert Moses, but we always called him Bob Moses in part maybe so to distinguish him from Robert Moses, the New York builder, developer, great leader. Bob Moses went into Mississippi in 1961 and came up with a strategy of voter registration and carried that through, leading to the COFO, Mississippi Summer of Voter Registration. That was what the three civil rights workers were there for, and eventually it led to the delegation that went to the Democratic Convention. And John Doar had enormous respect for Bob Moses, Ella Baker, so many other people whose names I should be able to recall and I can't. And what they did, the change would not have come without the enormous courage, strategy, and vision of people like Bob Moses and the other students of the SNCC.
Do you recall his opinion of Robert Kennedy?
Oh, he thought that Attorney General Kennedy was just a dedicated lawyer, leader, politician, worked very hard. They had a close relationship. Never heard him refer to him as anything other than Attorney General Kennedy or General Kennedy. And he had great faith in his leadership, Attorney General Kennedy's leadership.
Did he talk to you? Do you remember his reaction to the assassination of then Senator Kennedy?
I don't have a specific recollection.
Was he close at all to Senator Ted Kennedy?
Yes, he was. At Burke Marshall's funeral in New York, that was held, memorial service that was held 6 or 7 years ago. I lose track of the time, Tim. Senator Kennedy spoke, and I saw John Doar and Senator Kennedy engaged in a close conversation, and you could just tell there was a feeling of respect and devotion. You know, Mr. Doar had this profound effect on the people who worked with him in the Civil Rights Division. This reunion that we had, Voices of the Civil Rights Division then and now, on October 28th and 29th. People talked about it over and over again, both formally and informally, about how important it was in their development as a lawyer, as a person. Bob Moses spoke at that event. He began his speech by saying, "How many people in this room worked for John Doar? Stand up." Probably 200 people there, Tim, and a large group of people stood up. And then he said, "How many people worked for the movement?" A little smaller group of people, but a lot of people stood up. Julian Bond was there. Clarence Jones, Dr. King's lawyer, was there. And as you were asking me sort of these, what I assume are concluding questions, and causing me to perhaps think back a little bit, I just think that the impact that these two events had on my life, not only helping me understand that the rule of law can make a difference and law can bring about change, but I'm now the director of the legal clinics at Pacific McGeorge, and I work with indigent clients and with students. And I think back to those days and how much my own legal ability is influenced, and my personal character was influenced by John Doar in both of these worlds. And I feel blessed.
As a concluding question, what influence and effect do you think the civil rights work that John Doar had on the impeachment inquiry?
I think there were a number of commonalities, many of which we've talked about, including the need to develop the facts and to have an unbiased presentation, and to have not only impartiality but the perception of impartiality, reliance on a small group of people. I think that he had a sense of confidence in who he was. And again, I sort of want to go back to the fact that I think in some ways he's a very modest man. But he has a sense of confidence of what he could accomplish. And I think that that sense of confidence, after having been such a leader in 1967, I wonder if that didn't give him the strength to go through some of what we've talked about, those difficult times, about knowing that a lawyer who believes in the rule of law and believes in justice and thinks that legal problems need to be addressed, whether that didn't have a great deal of influence in his ability to sort of bob and weave and do everything that he needed to do. I guess it's really in a 9-month period of time, from late December until August 1974.